Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
All right, joining us now is Melanie Coburn. And Melanie, what a day on Friday. We were talking to Don Van Natta, and then the news broke. And I kind of want to talk to you about the wide scope of all of this here. But I feel like I have to start simply by asking, what was your reaction to the Snyders putting out a statement, and for the first time hearing from them directly that they are indeed selling the team?
Well, obviously, it was a big relief for me. I've been very cautiously optimistic throughout this whole process, and it's sort of been anticlimactic with all the different stages of the sale, the announcement, the process, all the bidding groups, everything that we've seen. It's just a lot to process and to get through. So, I still remain cautiously optimistic. I know the NFL has to approve this ownership group, but the fact that they put out that statement, shows that they are indeed behind this, that this is their, intention, and that they've approved this group. So, I feel relieved. I'm excited for new ownership, and I remain hopeful that hopefully the worst is behind us and the best is yet to come.
So I think it's important to ask this question too. When you guys, you and Megan and Emily Applegate and all your brave former colleagues that stepped forward and said hey, this stuff happened to us and it's important that everybody knows. What was the idea that he would ever sell the team something that you guys had as a goal, something that was in the back of your head as a possibility, or not, something that didn't even register at all and it was never really even about that?
No, that was obviously the biggest goal, right? That was most people never thought it would be possible, but in the back of our minds, we knew what type of human being he was, and that he should not have the privilege of owning a franchise in the National Football League. And we've been saying it all along. I think now that more of the stories have come out and more truths have come to the surface, we can all agree that he should not be in ownership. And that was a big goal that we had, and I think that I'm super pumped that we're here and it's happening. But I've got my shirt on today because we're still waiting for a report. And as you know, the Wilkinson report was buried, and the Mary Jo White report is in progress. And, we're still waiting for that one. So we'll see what the NFL decides to do. I've said all along, we want transparency so that true accountability can take place. And while Snyder has lost the franchise, he's still going to profit significantly from this sale. And I think that the NFL owes it to us to produce this report and make it public and written. And I also think that they owe those of us who've been involved in these investigations from the start protection against Dan Snyder moving forward for retaliating against us. So we'll see. We'll see what they say. They haven't responded to my attorneys. And, I think that they're still very much in the process of figuring all of that out.
So last one kind of along those lines. Melanie Coburn is our guest here on the Hoffman Show. Would simply be this. It's happening, and on some level that is a miracle because teams do not get, I don't even want to say stripped away from owners, because this is a voluntary sale. Dan ultimately saw the writing on the wall. We can all read the reports that they would have voted him out and he's kind of got no leverage, but they didn't. He ultimately got to the point where it became intolerable and he sold. But the idea that we got to this point is something that, as you mentioned in your first answer, was incredibly far-fetched at the beginning, because being the owner of this franchise was a part of Dan Snyder's identity that he did not want to give up. Knowing that this outcome, while it has happened, was incredibly unlikely at the beginning, why did you guys persist, and why did you guys start this process anyway?
Because too many people have been silenced over the years. There's too many stories of inappropriate behavior, toxic culture, sexual harassment, sexual assault. These things are not okay. You can't just pay people off. This behavior needs to stop. And as I've said before, the NFL is the most prominent workplace in the country. And if we let these owners get away with it there, it's going to trickle down into all the workplaces across the country. And, I want for my niece, for all of the women I cheered with and graced the sidelines with, for their kids. Like, I want them to have a safe place to work in the NFL. And I think that, progress needs to be made. And unless people come forward and speak the truth and speak truth to power, nothing will change.
So Don Van Natta had the report on, what was that, Friday? 152 days ago on Friday. That's how these things tend to go, Melanie. Don had the report that Dan is trying to suppress the report in some way, shape, or form. Just to be clear, when you guys agreed, you, Megan, and those that talked to Beth Wilkinson and were incredibly disappointed and how that report was not released, when you guys agreed to talk to Mary Jo White, what was the agreement there? And is this just kind of like a verbal agreement, or was there like signed documentation, through your lawyers that, we will participate under these circumstances? Like, what was the level of agreement and what was kind of in the agreement?
I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I do know that the several of us that were interviewed by Mary Jo White, all of us were very, very clear with our attorneys present that we were not participating in this investigation unless there was going to be a written public report. Mary Jo White and her colleagues promised that to us. I don't think there's written documentation per se, but there are recorded interviews with our attorneys working out those details before I would even speak. So I have to believe that she would not risk her reputation. She's very, very renowned and well regarded and esteemed in the community. And I don't think that she would do that after promising all of us. And I'm fairly certain that our attorneys will not let that happen.
Yeah, that was something that Lisa said, I believe with Grant and Danny on Friday. Lisa Banks, one of your attorneys, said that, we were promised by Mary Jo White and her team. I have found it interesting when Roger Goodell has spoken that he has said the findings of the report will be released. Is that something that concerns you that he keeps going to the findings? Like, in other words, are you okay if Mary Jo White, directly from Mary Jo White, not via Roger Goodell where he has a chance to be a filter, but at least like a summary findings from Mary Jo White are released? Or would you like to see kind of a full report, full transcripts, full everything, to the extent that can be released publicly? Like, is it that or bust?
I mean, I'm going to leave that up to my attorney. Obviously, I know how I participated and I know the stories that I shared with their team. I'm assuming Lisa Banks and Deborah Katz will know, whether or not this was watered down and whether or not they are still hiding any investigative, findings and summarizing them and whitewashing them. And my hope is that does not happen. Again, I think she's a very highly reputable attorney. I have to think deep down that Beth Wilkinson didn't mean to bury these findings either. I know that the Junkies had received that draft report suggesting that Snyder divest ownership. And from what I can understand, that was a pretty significant source. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was her suggestion to the NFL. And that common interest agreement was what, ended up with the oral report and, burying those findings. So, I don't know, time will tell. Again, I'm cautiously optimistic about the report, about what it will entail, but, we've gotten this far. And I hope that more truth continues to come out. Truth will always come to light. And, he lost the team. He lost the franchise that he was hoping to leave to his kids. He wanted that to be their legacy. And, even though he's profiting, I know money is very, very important to him. But for me, my integrity and, the relationships and community in my life are so much more important than a paycheck to get out of town.
Melanie Coburn with us just a few more minutes here on the Hoffman Show. Of course, she and her former colleagues led the charge to have the truth uncovered about Dan Snyder, which I frame that way intentionally because it's what happened. It's not a crusade for no reason. It's the truth. And if the truth reflects poorly on someone, that's on the person, not the person who exposes it. Something that people should keep in mind over the next couple of weeks, because now, Melanie, I think we reach a really interesting part of this where a lot of people are going to want to just move on, right? Now it's like, okay, he sold the team. I don't want to ever hear about Dan Snyder again. Why is it so important to you, and why do you think it's so important at large that the truth continues to come out and that, for instance, the Mary Jo White report does not get buried?
Well, it's important so that history doesn't repeat itself. We need to learn from the past mistakes. The NFL needs to learn from, how they handled this situation, how they handled an owner who was out of control. I mean, they need to figure out how to avoid this moving forward. I also think, it's really important for the new ownership group, who I have a lot of faith in, just based on my research and mutual connections and, hearing about their leadership style. They sound like a great group of people. And I hope that they can come in and really, they need to know what was in that report too. They need to know what he did to this fan base, to the former employees, to the former alumni, and everybody that was in that organization. It's broken. And it needs to be reconciled. And I think that they need to come in and they need to be mindful of that and, talk to the various groups of people, the alumni, the football. There's players who are still sort of estranged from the team and want nothing to do with it. There's fans that, gave up season tickets years ago because of Dan Snyder. And I think that there's such a huge opportunity here to reconcile this fan base, to bring it back to its glory. And I know that that's what they want ultimately. So, I hope NFL releases this report so we can learn from it and learn how not to be moving forward. And also, see who was hurt along the way and how can we sort of bring them back in and get everybody cheering together again.
Speaking of reconciliation, do you expect anyone from the new ownership group or the organization to reach out to you after the sale is finalized?
I mean, I would love for that to happen, just to give input on how various things were handled over the past 3 years. It's been a really rough time for a lot of women who were involved in the alumni or, in the cheerleaders. Our own alumni association sort of was divided, and there was women that were, supporting and aligning with the team and not really respecting or honoring what had happened to the women in the videos. And so there's a lot of division, I think, overall in the fan base. There were a lot of Dan Snyder, loyalists who were saying that we were making it up or we just wanted money. And just people didn't really follow along. There's so much in this in the past 3 years. It's really hard to follow along. If you're a casual fan, you probably don't understand how much it really was. But if they had read, right, they knew we didn't take the money. We didn't accept the hush money. We're not suing Dan Snyder. Like, this is not for that purpose. Like, we just want a healthy, safe workplace for this team moving forward. And we want the NFL now to be held accountable for their how they handled this whole process.
Do you think that there is any chance that there is any kind of, I'll call it repercussions for the NFL? Or is it just like, obviously Congress is looked at a bunch of stuff. They had Goodell up there, but it seems like Snyder is, I don't want to call him a scapegoat because that makes it sound like, they just put it on Dan even though it wasn't his fault. Like, no, it's his fault. But like he's going to be the fall guy, and that's going to avoid others potentially going down. Do you think that there's any way that should there be any other repercussions for the NFL or anybody involved? And two, do you think that's likely or possible?
Well, I think now that we know about the common interest agreement, we know that NFL knew that those findings were never going to be public anyway. And I believe the Beth Wilkinson investigation itself felt, they misled us in that investigation. So I don't know whether that's Goodell or any other executive leadership at the NFL, but somebody there knew and was complicit in this cover-up. I do believe that. It's going to be hard to prove, right? I guess it just depends on how, the next few weeks play out, whether or not this report also gets buried or whitewashed, and we'll see sort of how they respond to everything that's happening. I mean, it's all happening so fast. It feels slow for the fan base, but it is happening pretty quickly. So I think the next few weeks will be telling. The owners' meetings, if there's any votes on the sale, those types of things, and of course the report.
Last thing for you is Melanie Coburn is with us here on the Hoffman Show. You were a fan for a long time before you ever worked there. You obviously were super involved with the team as a cheerleader and then as a employee of the club outside of the cheer squad. You're still local. Like, you got kids that presumably like football. Like, do you become a fan again? Have you found another team? Like, what's the relationship for you and the Washington Commanders moving forward once this thing gets finalized?
Oh, I was a season ticket holder for many years as well. I grew up a Redskins fan. My dream was to be a Redskinette. I cheered them on for my entire life, as long as I can remember. And I would love nothing more than to be able to sport my burgundy and gold and cheer them on and be a part of the fan base. I have not switched teams. That's not something I would do because it is an NFL thing, right? Like, I am still boycotting the NFL until this report is made public, till there's true transparency and accountability. And Dan Snyder profiting $5 billion. Yeah, he loses the franchise, but there's still no public report of this. And he basically will have gotten away with paying everybody off for their silence. So for me, I want the transparency and accountability. And hopefully if the NFL handles this the right way, then you'll see me next season.
That's assuming I would go to FedEx Field, Melanie. That's a big assumption. I'm not going out there, but that's a different story for a different time. Melanie Coburn with us here on the Hoffman Show. Thank you for your diligence. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it greatly here on the radio, and I know a lot of fans who obviously have sent you many kind of messages appreciate your diligence and your bravery along the way.
Craig, thank you so much for your continued support and for talking to all of us and giving us a platform to tell our side of the story, and for, just also seeking truth. I appreciate you.